Imagine standing at the edge of a stage, the spotlight warm against your skin, the faces in the crowd blurred into an ocean of expectation. You've prepared, rehearsed every word, every gesture. And yet, something inside you freezes. Your mouth is dry. Your heart pounds as if it's trying to escape your chest. Your hands, once steady, now tremble with the weight of invisible chains. This is a moment familiar to anyone who has ever faced the challenge of stepping into their own life fully. And in this silence, a harsh thought whispers, "I'm not confident enough." Most of us grow up believing confidence is a gift. Some people are simply born with it. They walk into rooms and command attention effortlessly, smile without hesitation, speak without fear. And we, in contrast, feel small, insufficient, or incomplete. Perhaps it's a voice in childhood telling us we're shy, awkward, or not good enough. Perhaps it's the endless comparison on social media, the highlight reels of other people's lives silently mocking our hesitation. We conclude, often unconsciously, that confidence is something that exists outside of us, a trait we either possess or we do not. But here's the first truth that cuts against every myth we've ever been fed. Confidence is not a fixed quality. It is not a mystical gift. It is not the result of charisma or luck. Confidence is created. It is an outcome, not an inheritance. It is a skill, a psychological construct, a dance between belief and action. And the moment we understand this, the illusion begins to crack. Albert Bandura, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, called this skill self-efficacy, the belief in our ability to influence outcomes through our actions. He discovered that it is not our inherent talents that dictate our success or courage, but our belief that we can act in the world and shape it. In other words, the confident person is not someone who never feels fear, but someone who repeatedly chooses action despite it. This is the secret that the world rarely tells us. Confidence is not born, it is built. Yet the tension that keeps us paralyzed is not external. It lives inside us. It is the voice that insists our inadequacy is permanent. That one failure defines us. That one misstep proves we are incapable. We call this voice self-doubt, but it is more than doubt. It is a lens, a filter that distorts reality. When we look through it, every opportunity becomes a test we are destined to fail. And every avoided challenge becomes evidence for the illusion we have accepted as truth, that we are not enough. But what if that lens could be changed? What if the reality you experience is not the only reality available to you? What if confidence is not something you wait for, but something you actively construct? This is where Bandura's insight becomes revolutionary. The moment you understand that your actions, not your feelings, shape your reality, you step into a world where fear is no longer a barrier, but a guide. Confidence is no longer an abstract aspiration. It becomes a process, a series of deliberate acts that prove to your mind and body that you are capable. Consider the paradox. We think we need confidence to begin. We believe that only if we feel ready can we speak up, try, fail, or create. But in truth, we become confident by doing. Confidence is not a precondition for action. It is the reward of action. Each small step forward, each moment where you push against the weight of fear, rewires your brain. It rewrites your identity. The person who once hesitated becomes someone who acts. The person who once froze in front of a room now stands and speaks, not because they never feared, but because they chose to act anyway. And yet, the challenge lies in the invisible nature of this process. We live in a world obsessed with instant validation, where confidence is portrayed as a visible aura, a public display of ease. The quiet, incremental growth of self-efficacy is invisible, internal. No one applauds the small victories. Finishing the report on time, asking a question in a meeting, making a phone call you've been avoiding for days. Yet these small acts are the foundation of authentic confidence. They accumulate silently, like water carving canyons in stone, until one day, the transformation is undeniable. In this space between illusion and reality, the mind often rebels. It wants proof before action. It wants certainty before risk. But the truth of human psychology is far subtler. Our emotions follow our actions, not the other way around. Courage precedes confidence. The body precedes belief. And in that paradox lies the first step toward liberation. The moment you act despite fear, the world begins to bend toward your agency. You learn gradually that the reality you inhabit is shaped not only by what happens to you, but by how you respond, what you attempt, and what you refuse to avoid. Philosophers have long understood this dynamic. Nietzsche spoke of the individual who must become who they are, forging identity through struggle and repeated self-overcoming. Jung explored the shadow, the hidden fearful part of ourselves that must be confronted and integrated if we are to stand whole. Frankl, in the darkest moments of human suffering, revealed that meaning and courage arise not from circumstance, but from choice, the conscious decision to act in alignment with what matters most. Bandura psychology is a modern echo of these timeless truths. Confidence is not given. It is taken, step by deliberate step, in the arena of lived experience. And so, the illusion begins to crumble. The notion that you must feel ready, that the world is waiting for you to magically acquire courage, that fear is a signal to retreat. All of it dissolves when you grasp the fundamental truth. Your reality is not a static stage upon which you perform. It is a malleable landscape shaped by belief and action. Every hesitation strengthens the illusion. Every small act of courage chips away at it. As this idea takes root, the mind experiences a subtle shift. The terror of standing at the edge of the stage transforms into an awareness of possibility. The pounding heart becomes a signal of life, a pulse urging you forward rather than warning you to stop. The trembling hands become instruments of proof that action precedes confidence. And within this transformation lies a quiet, cinematic revelation. What you have long believed to be your limitation is, in fact, the first step toward liberation. By the end of this section, the viewer is no longer simply told about confidence. They are invited into the psychological experience of it. The fear, hesitation, and self-doubt are acknowledged as part of the story, not enemies to eradicate, but signals to interpret, opportunities to respond. Confidence is framed as a skill, a practice, a series of deliberate choices. And the transition emerges naturally. If confidence can be built, if reality can be shaped by action, then the next question becomes inevitable. How? Your mind, once trapped in the illusion of inadequacy, now begins to open to possibility. You stand on the precipice, aware that fear is not the end, but the beginning of growth. You realize that every missed opportunity has been a lesson, every failure a small fragment of evidence in the larger story. And as you breathe, as the tension in your body softens, a reflective thought surfaces, bridging the gap between what is and what can be. Your reality is not what you see, it's what you believe you can change. And with that, the path forward emerges, leading naturally into the exploration of the psychological and philosophical principles that will illuminate the mechanics of self-efficacy and the art of building confidence from the ground up. The moment we begin to question what confidence really is, we step into a world that feels paradoxical. We have been taught to measure it externally, by applause, recognition, or the approval of others. But Albert Bandura asks us to look inward, to measure it not by appearances, but by the quiet, internal voice that whispers, "I can." Self-efficacy, he argued, is the engine behind all action. It is the belief that our efforts can shape outcomes, transform circumstances, and even redefine who we are. It is the lens through which the world becomes something we act upon rather than something we merely endure. At first, this idea is both liberating and terrifying. If confidence is built through action, then every hesitation, every avoided challenge, every retreat from opportunity has quietly trained our minds to expect failure. In essence, fear is not an external force. It is an echo of repeated choices that tell the brain, "You cannot." And just as fear is learned, so too is courage. The brain is plastic, constantly rewiring itself in response to experience. Each small act of engagement with the world, each deliberate attempt to act despite uncertainty, strengthens neural pathways of belief, embedding the knowledge that action produces capability. Bandura identified 4 primary sources of self-efficacy, each a doorway into the architecture of our confidence. The first, mastery experiences, is the most powerful. These are the moments when we confront fear, take action, and survive, even if imperfectly. Imagine learning to swim in turbulent water. Each stroke is shaky, every movement uncertain. But with each attempt, the body learns. The mind remembers. Every tiny victory is a brick in the foundation of self-belief. Mastery experiences are cumulative. They do not shout with dramatic fanfare, yet their impact is profound. One step, one action, repeated enough times, transforms hesitation into competence, and competence into confidence. The second source is vicarious learning. Human beings are profoundly social creatures, attuned to the actions of others. Watching someone else succeed, especially someone relatable, tells the brain that similar achievement is possible. This is not mere imitation. It is an unconscious recalibration of possibility. Philosophers have touched on this idea for centuries. Jung described the power of archetypes, the internalized models of human behavior that guide action and shape identity. When we observe a mentor, a peer, or even a character in a story embodying courage, we activate our own latent potential. Confidence begins as a borrowed spark, which we later cultivate into our own flame. The third source is social persuasion, the voices, words, and encouragements that subtly shift our belief in ourselves. These are not the empty compliments of casual conversation, but precise, intentional affirmations from those who recognize our capacity. Frankl, reflecting on his experiences in concentration camps, observed that even a single word of recognition or belief could preserve a person's will to act in the face of unimaginable adversity. When someone says, "I know you can," it reverberates in the mind in ways that our own self-doubt cannot easily override. Social persuasion, though fragile, becomes a scaffold that supports the incremental building of self-efficacy. The fourth source, perhaps the most overlooked, is the interpretation of physiological and emotional states. We often mistake the racing heart, the tremor in the hands, or the tightness in the chest for evidence of incapacity. But these signals, Bandura reminds us, are not inherently negative. They are simply the body's response to challenge. If we interpret them as readiness rather than threat, the same signals that once paralyzed us now energize action. Nietzsche spoke of life as a series of confrontations, the eternal struggle to transform suffering into strength. Our physiological states are the first battlefield in that struggle, the initial arena where we choose interpretation over reaction, action over retreat. Taken together, these 4 sources reveal a profound truth. Confidence is not the absence of fear, nor the possession of extraordinary talent. It is the product of engagement, interpretation, observation, and repeated experience. Every act, every perception, every reframing of internal signals contributes to a mind capable of asserting agency over reality. And yet, understanding this cognitively is not the same as feeling it viscerally. For the transformation to occur, it must be lived. It must be experienced in the body, in the subtle contractions of the chest, the quickened heartbeat, and the trembling hands, all signs of life being channeled into action. In this context, the philosophical depth becomes striking. Jung's exploration of the shadow, the hidden, repressed, or feared aspects of ourselves, is a direct mirror to the concept of self-efficacy. Every time we refuse to act, we are honoring a part of ourselves that believes we are incapable. Each courageous act, however small, is a confrontation with the shadow, an integration of fear into competence. Nietzsche's notion of becoming who you are emerges here, too. Identity is forged not in comfort, but in repeated trials, in the deliberate shaping of the self through action. And Frankl's insistence on meaning reminds us that the choices we make in these moments are not trivial. They define the narrative of our lives. Confidence is thus not an optional luxury. It is an existential imperative, a tool for navigating a world of uncertainty and shaping a life that feels alive and intentional. The internal and external worlds are deeply intertwined in this process. The external world presents opportunities, challenges, and feedback. The internal world interprets, integrates, and responds. Self-efficacy bridges the two. A person with high self-efficacy does not simply react to the external environment. They engage with it, testing limits, learning boundaries, and expanding capacity. A person with low self-efficacy sees the same environment as rigid and unyielding, a reflection of imagined inadequacy rather than real constraint. The difference is subtle yet transformative. It is the difference between living in a reactive, constrained state and inhabiting a world of possibility where action drives growth. And so, the narrative becomes cinematic in its rhythm. The mind of the viewer is guided through tension, struggle, and revelation. They begin to recognize that every hesitation, every "I can't," is a story they have learned to believe. And every small act of courage, every incremental attempt, is a story of potential they are learning to author. It is not dramatic. It is intimate, personal, and profound. Confidence is built in silence, in repetition, in the quiet moments where no one is watching, where no external applause exists, and where only the evidence of action reinforces the mind's growing belief in itself. This is the crucial transition. Understanding self-efficacy intellectually is one thing, but experiencing it psychologically is another. The viewer begins to grasp that the world has not failed them. They have not been born inadequate. Their internal patterns of avoidance and hesitation have been trained through repeated cycles of doubt and fear. But the brain's plasticity, the human capacity for observation, the subtle power of social persuasion, and the interpretive flexibility of the body all create a roadmap for change. Confidence is not mysterious. It is structured. It is deliberate. It is, in essence, a craft. By the end of this section, the viewer is not only aware of the mechanics of self-efficacy, but is emotionally prepared for transformation. They see themselves in the cinematic mirror of philosophy and psychology, a human being capable of growth, shaped by actions, interpretable signals, and deliberate effort. The stage is set for the next step, the section that will move from understanding to lived experience, from theoretical clarity to emotional and behavioral transformation. The realization crystallizes. Confidence is not something to acquire. It is something to practice, a muscle to train, a reality to construct. It begins with a choice, a subtle decision that may seem insignificant in the moment, but in the quiet space between the impulse to act and the instinct to retreat, there lies the turning point. You are standing at the edge again, at the precipice of your own limitations. Fear stirs within you like an old, familiar companion, whispering its worn-out script. You can't. You'll fail. This is too much for you. But in that moment, you hear another voice, quieter, but unmistakably yours. What if I try anyway? What if I act despite this fear? This is the beginning of the shift. This is where transformation begins. The battle for confidence is not won in one grand, dramatic victory. It is forged in the small moments when you choose to step forward, to act despite the swirling doubts, to take the next step even when every fiber of your being wants to retreat. This is where you begin to rewrite your identity. The first time you act despite fear, you challenge the story you have told yourself about who you are. The second time, the fear becomes a little quieter, the action a little easier. The third time, something inside you starts to believe that this new story, the story of someone who acts, despite everything, is who you are becoming. What happens next is subtle, yet profound. The transformation is not the sudden appearance of a new, confident you. It is the slow, steady erosion of the old story that has held you back. It is the quiet deconstruction of the narrative that you are inadequate, that you cannot succeed, that you are forever trapped by your fears. As you continue to act, to move forward, the evidence begins to accumulate. The brain starts to gather proof that challenges can be faced, that fears can be overcome, that the world does not collapse when you step into discomfort. In this space, confidence is born not from a sudden epiphany, but from a series of lived experiences that shape the way you see yourself. Each action, no matter how small, becomes a new brick in the foundation of a new self. It is like the process of sculpting, where you chip away at the old stone, the self-doubt, the hesitation, the belief in your own incapacity, until something new emerges. It is not perfection that you are after, but progress. With every challenge faced, with every uncomfortable moment endured, you chip away at the illusions that once held you captive. The person you were yesterday, hesitant and afraid, begins to fade into the background, replaced by someone more capable, more courageous, more real. The metamorphosis is quiet but unmistakable. You no longer wait for confidence to arrive, you act, and in acting, you become confident. This process of transformation is not linear. There will be days when the fear returns, when doubt whispers louder than reason, when you are tempted to return to old patterns of avoidance. But this is where the real breakthrough occurs. The true test of self-efficacy is not whether you feel confident all the time. It is whether you continue to act despite the feelings of doubt. Confidence is not a destination. It is a practice, a way of being that you build through repetition, through the decision to act in the face of uncertainty. When you fail, when you stumble, when you fall short, you are not proving your inadequacy. You are proving your resilience. You are proving that you are capable of returning to the challenge, that you are willing to grow through the discomfort. It is here that Nietzsche's philosophy becomes most relevant. He argued that true strength lies not in the absence of struggle, but in the willingness to confront it head-on. To become who you are, you must first face who you are not. Confidence is not the ability to avoid fear. It is the courage to stand in its presence and say, "You do not control me." The philosopher's will to power is not about domination or external achievement. It is about the inner strength to choose the self you wish to become, despite the world's attempts to convince you of your limitations. Confidence is the quiet force that allows you to choose your path, to move forward even when the path seems unclear, to continue in the face of setbacks and challenges. The real insight begins when you understand that confidence is not a thing you possess, but a way you engage with the world. It is an ongoing process of self-creation. Each step you take, each new experience you integrate into your sense of self, reshapes the person you believe yourself to be. In this sense, confidence becomes an act of authorship. You are writing your own story, with every choice you make, every risk you take, every action you engage in. And the most profound truth of all is this: the more you write, the more the narrative shifts. We are, in a way, all storytellers. We tell ourselves stories about who we are, about what we are capable of, about what we deserve. And just like any story, these narratives can be rewritten. The person who once believed they were too shy, too inadequate, too unworthy, can rewrite that story with each small victory, with each decision to show up, even when it feels impossible. You are not locked into the person you once thought you were. The act of rewriting your own story is the act of reclaiming your agency, of stepping out of the limitations you have internalized and into the possibility of who you could become. There will always be resistance, the fear, the doubt, the voice that tells you it is too late, too hard, too risky. But each time you act in defiance of that voice, you become the author of a new narrative. You become the person who shows up even when it's hard. You become the person who chooses to act, even when fear threatens to paralyze you. And with each choice, you reinforce a new truth. You are capable. You are powerful. You are enough. In this way, confidence is not simply about performing a task well or achieving a goal. It is about who you become in the process of doing. The act of showing up, of facing discomfort, of persevering through doubt, shapes the person you are becoming. And this is the most profound shift of all. Confidence is not something you wait for, it is something you create.